I'm offer support.
Thank you. Or criticism, if you think I'm not right on it. Okay, this comes from Lyotard and Roger Scruton. But I'll give you page numbers if I quote anybody. So, as I understand it, Kant's combining the work of Hume and Leibniz. Hume is an empiricist, and he's into the subjective. And Leibniz is a rationalist, and he's into objectivity.
All both of them, please.
Do we answer?
You have to be honest.
No,
We're not here. It's not okay.
Yeah, we're in a seminar.
We're in the building office, Jakub
We're in
speaking.
a seminar.
Johnny's office, Jakub speaking, how can I help you? Oh, she's not around today. She's going to be in later, but I'm not sure what time, to be honest. Around 5? Yeah, I think around 5. Do you want me to pass the message or tell her who called? Francesca. Oh, let me just grab a pen. Anybody have a piece of paper? Oh, there we go. Sorry, we have a tutorial right now. Don't worry, that's fine. That's fine, that's brilliant. Francesca, yeah? Yeah, because there is a Christmas staff party, so hopefully she will attend that. Okay, that's great. I will pass the message that you called if I see her, okay? Thank you, bye, bye.
That gives me a bit of time to get ahead of my marvellous diagram. So, according to Roger Scruton, what Kant is up to is trying to synthesise these two guys, the empiricist and the rationalist. And I've taken the liberty of doing a sort of Lacanian move here by saying that we can put this here, signifier here, and signified here. So that when Kant synthesises these two things, so we've got, and then crudely, bodies and words. So if we have a sort of Venn diagram of words and bodies synthesizing in the Kantian way, then we have identity, which Braver calls truth as correspondence, and that's on page 159. But we also have truth as concealment. This is what Braver calls difference, unconcealment. Which looks like that. So that you have words and bodies failing to connect. So here they connect beautifully, they produce linguistic structure, they produce identity, and here they fail to connect, and you have difference. And what I'm proposing is that we can say, we can call this belonging, I think that's Heidegger, or agreement, and we can call this, Kant's term is tautogorical, when form and content agree with each other. So, tautogorical, and my pen's running out, and herism. I'm not sure if I'm using these Kantian terms correctly. Thank you.
And so what was that?
Herism.
Oh.
Herism. Yeah.
Like-
Meaning
Like an owl.
no, meaning experience. So tautography is when form and content agree with each other and you get identity, and herism is something more experiential. I think maybe herism.
But does it come from the word owl?
No.
Is it
No idea.
H-E-U, it's a Greek word that stands for finding.
Oh, fine.
It's like inventing, isn't it? Things
Finding.
that works.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
So we could see this as the unconcealment that Heidegger talks about. Truth as. And we can also sort of map linguistic theory onto this, because what you have here is a signifier and a signified and an equals sign, basically. This overlap amounts to the equals sign. So you can have, in a symbolic sign, the signifier equals the signified, or it stands in for it. And in an iconic sign, the signifier resembles the signified, or it stands in for it. Whereas here, there's no overlap. So you've got instead a plus sign, signifier plus signified. And I think that this sort of explains the Kantian sublime. And I'm reading it as something similar, perhaps the same thing as Lacan's jouissance. And I'm backing up my proposal with various quotes. The sublime attracts and repulses, so it keeps things apart, it keeps them together apart. And that's from page 68, Lyotard. The concept places itself out of reach of all presentation. The imagination founders, all of its forms are inane before the absolute. And I think that, which is from page 76 in Lyotard, sort of describes this negative space here, which we can call the sublime. Jacques Rancière calls it parole muette, or silent speech. And Heidegger calls it a telling silence. I think it's what Roland Barthes talking about when he talks about the punctum, and I think the tragic is also the tragic is also there. The sublime is characterized by having no distance, no limits, and no boundaries. So how do we achieve that? Well, last week Mattea showed us Leibniz's first dimension of the ground, that you've got to be able to have distance to something, to see it, to be able to have a ground to sort of say what it means and what it is. And I think we can characterize this, and that characterizes this space. But what happens in this space is something very peculiar, because we have no distance to what we're seeing. And I think you get it when sight becomes compromised. Kant goes on about the sublime being the enormous, you know, when nature gives signs of such magnitude and power of raw quality and in an inverted final relation. He says it's the absolute conceived as an idea but only felt. So he has this sense of sort of unboundaried enormity to do with the sublime. And I, as part of my research, have read a guy called Mladen Doller who talks about the voice. His book is called A Voice and Nothing More. And he says that when the sight is compromised, when you can't see something, you lose you lose the ability to distance yourself from it. And I think this is connected with what you had to say about Leibniz. If you can't see something, the eye gives us distance and the ear gives us involvement. So a theatre audience, which is what I'm interested in, has a very engaged and yet safe kind of engagement, because they can see and they know that it's not happening to them, but they can also hear. So they're sort of drawn in, they're sort of held in this together apart space. And if with a theatre audience you disturb their vision, you use a blackout, or you hide somebody under a blanket, or you use dim light, or you have masked actors as in the ancient drama, or you have somebody being murdered off stage, you can only hear their death cry as in ancient drama, then you're getting the uncanny, the Freudian uncanny, but you're on the road to the sublime, because you've lost your safe distance, and you're now kind of so face up to it that you can't get any distance from it, and it sort of overwhelms you. So the sublime, no distance, no limits, no boundaries, the without form, the without limit, Lyotard calls it on page 58. And I can give an example of this happening in a play by Edward Bond, where, I don't know if I've already talked about it, he's got a dummy and a dummy actor, and they represent an illegal immigrant, and the dummy actor speaks the immigrant's words, but everyone else in the play reacts to the dummy as though it were a real live person. And it expresses the dummy's situation. He's been a child soldier, he's been forced to kill his mother, and he's sort of disembodied by trauma. But so is everyone in the audience, because everyone in the audience, they're too far apart from each other for the dummy actor to ventriloquize the dummy, so it's a failed ventriloquist. So everyone in the audience has to do this all the time. So they're knitting up the signifier and the signified, which are deliberately kept apart, and which, if you want to make sense of what's going on, you have to knit them up for yourself. And I think this might be an activation of a Kantian categorical imperative, where we are sort of on behalf of this young man sort of feeling his trauma, or we're, he's trying to knit himself up, we're trying to knit him up. And I'd like to give an example of the sublime, which happens in the final scene of the play. The young woman who's taken him in off the streets to sort of protect him from the soldiers and been very kind to him, has compromised herself, and now she's being double-crossed by a people smuggler who was supposed to help them, but who's now saying that if she doesn't pay him loads of money, she'll have to prostitute herself. So she's, although she wants to be kind, her situation sort of completely brutalizes her, and she ends up murdering the dummy. She eviscerates him. First she physically abuses him, and then she sort of slashes the dummy, and you've got foam rubber all over the stage. And in the final scene, the dummy actor walks on, and he doesn't realise that he's dead, and he trips over his own viscera, and he looks down. So at that moment of looking down, he realises that he's dead, but he doesn't realise until that point. And a very strange thing happens in the audience, and I've seen this play a lot of times. It toured schools a few years ago, and I went and saw it in a lot of different schools, and audiences often had the same reaction to it. Was at that moment, people either laughed or they kind of gasped and choked. And it was sort of split whether people had this comic reaction or this tragic reaction in the same moment. And when I was thinking about it, I thought, it's because if you're used to looking at signifiers, if you're used to listening to things that people tell you, it's really easy to lie to you, it's really easy to con you. And you're, are you okay?
Sorry, just thought I left it back. Sorry. No, I left it in the outside something.
Okay. It's really easy to con you. And you're focusing on the signifier, which is the dummy actor. And then when he sort of trips over his own body, you might laugh because Freud cites Kant as saying comedy is an expectation that comes to nothing. So he thinks he's alive, doesn't realise he's dead. Oh, shit, I'm dead. And audiences laugh at that moment. The people that focus on the signifier or the dummy actor do, but the people that focus on the object are kind of experiencing the sublime tragic all along because they're yes, focusing on the signified, focusing on the body. So that's, I think, an example of the sublime, which I think is linked to the tragic. I can't be more precise than that. But I think it is summed up by the quote that Lyotard gives: the seriousness of melancholy, the suffering of an irreparable lack, a nostalgia for limitation, because this is a space where there is no limitation. This is a space of metonymy where we can't get distance from something. Lacan says that in the real we can only see part objects, which is exactly the same as the baby can't really see its mother, it just sees the breast. It's a part object. Can't get the distance away yet to sort of see the mother, it's just kind of engaging with the breast. And so this puts us in that state. And
Sorry, what did you say? Who quoted? Who says it about the distance and part of the object?
oh, and part objects, that's Lacan. And I think what you have in the sublime is a situation where the signifier and the object don't add up. And you realise that language has been bloody lying to you all this time. And Foucault writes in Madness and Civilization about madness really just being a being out of step with society. So, you know, throughout medieval times, people who weren't sort of doing the right things socially were kind of called mad. And indeed, Lyotard says that the critique must place the sublime close to insanity, and I think this is what he's on about. That most of society kind of believes the signifier, goes along with it, but the mad have a different perspective on things.
Could you just say that again?
The critique must place the sublime close to insanity, and that's page 55.
Where?
It's the state of critical thought when it reveals its extreme limit. It's a spasmodic state, and jouissance is characterised by sort of muscular spasm. So these are the sort of overlaps that I'm finding very rich. Sorry, I've finished now.
Where, I mean, I see what the links you're trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking the Lyotard interpretation and pushing it another step further. But where, for example, in these, which is not wrong.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think it's wrong. I mean, I'm not that knowledgeable with this material.
Yes, I haven't. I have to say, I haven't read Kant. I've read Lyotard on Kant, and I've read Roger Scruton on Kant. So that's a fair point.
In the first
and
chapter.
Lyotard has also read Lacan, so you see bits of that. Yeah.
Yes, in the first chapter, Lyotard goes on quite. The whole first chapter is about the reflection.
Yeah.
How does it enter this?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked me that because I forgot to mention the categorical quadrangle or the headings, the reflective headings that Kant uses, which are form and content, which I see as form and content. Identity and difference. Identity and difference. In and out, and agreement and opposition. Now I could, but I won't subject you to. If I look at the graph of desire, which is what I've worked on a lot, I can make those four categories work in relation to the graph of desire, which I got really excited about, but I won't sort of do that to you at this point.
Sorry, what's the graph of desire?
The graph of desire is Lacan's sort of peculiar stitch that looks like that. And it describes the advent of the subject through language. So he's talking about the same thing, which is words and bodies and how they relate to each other. Society and individuals. It looks like that. And he writes about it in the subversion of the subject in the dialectic of the unconscious, which is in Eccrites. And you can find the graph in Eccrites. But the graph, oh yes, and I think he's talking about desire because Lyotard talks about Kant writing a theory of forces in the almost Freudian sense of the term. And I'm going, he means desire! Which is the desire for one human mind to connect with another.
Yes, I'm just trying to formulate them. The quadrangle you mentioned, which is what you use as a jumping board to go over.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't remember the forever. One is identity and difference. The other one is
Content and form.
it's four oppositions. Those are not the immediate distribution that Kant comes up with. It's something that Lyotard thinks is much more important in the game of reflection.
Yeah.
At the end of the introduction of the critique of judgment, there is a small table of distribution of epistemology, if we like, which I read it down, maybe we can write it. It's four columns.
Yeah.
The first column is all the mental powers. The second column is the cognitive powers.
Mental powers.
Yes. Cognitive powers is the second column. A priori principles is the third column.
Right.
And then the fourth column is what these are applied to. So if one goes across horizontally, for the mental power is the cognitive power. These works, or it is called understanding, its a priori principle is the law.
Yeah.
It's a scientific law, the law of logic,
Yeah.
and it's applied to nature.
Say the first two again.
So the cognitive power, also known as understanding, goes in the second column, as an a priori principle, the law, something that cannot be otherwise, the ultimate, the most simplest and minimal description that describes the system and how it stays together. And it is applied to nature.
Yeah.
And this would be the critique of pure reason. Then there is the feeling of pleasure and displeasure,
Yeah.
whose cognitive power is judgment. The a priori principle here is translated as, I can pronounce it properly in English, purposiveness.
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 Yeah.
And it is applied to art or beauty.
Yeah.
And then the power of desire, whose faculty is reason, that is a priori principle is the final purpose, finality,
Yeah.
and it applies to freedom.
Okay.
This distribution is the overall official distribution of Kant's work.
Okay.
Lyotard, in the first chapter of his book on the Little Sublime, says that inside these, or better, to understand the functioning of these, which are actually not distributed without a hierarchy, because understanding and reason, for knowledge and freedom, knowledge and morals, are actually held together by judgment. Judgment is a very funny one
Yeah.
in Lyotard's analysis. And inside judgment, which is why I asked about reflexivity before,
Yeah.
there is the quadrangle you came up, which Lyotard says is actually the most important thing. It's a sort of a hidden logic.
The categorical.
The oppositions
quadrant.
of
The concepts of reflection.
yes. And then therefore it sort of renegotiates or relaunches the analysis of the three steps, the process of the critique, from these inner working reflection, because reflection is what keeps together the two layers of thought. The knowledge on one line, which by itself is pretty just arithmetically adds.
Outside, yeah.
Yeah. And with all the sensibility
Yeah.
and sensitivity and
Yeah.
the senses, which it sort of rolls back or unfolds, depending where you are looking, all the way to what it believes is the most essential part of it, which is thought feeling itself. So even before it feels the body, it feels it has all the problems that you came up with, and it is thought feeling itself. So it's a problem of consciousness in there, which is always already doubled, redoubled, or folded over itself.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe we went into this book after reading Kant, because there is an idea of continuous
Right.
bringing together and opening up about.
There's a lovely quote that describes that space from Lacan. It says, "I think where I am not, therefore I am not where I think," and it's him sending up Descartes. But it describes the vacuum between words and bodies when they refuse to fit each other.
Yes.
And I think it describes the sublime.
But if you posit ideas, not ideas I critique, I'm thinking with you,
Yeah,
trying to
it's helpful.
put together what I understood with what you're
Yeah.
saying, because I intuitively I find some links in these sort of
Venn
summa.
diagrams.
By the two sets, the overlapping part and the excluded part, so
Yeah.
the two parts. They are to me they leave a particularly sharp distinction, especially when we come to the Sublime, which in the way I understand it is not what Kant is after.
Okay.
Because what Kant's finds, because the faculty of judgment, the reflection, is the one that refers to itself, feels itself, and finds an accordance between the data of experience, the subjective. Subjective becomes a delicate term here. The data of experience, the body,
Yeah.
the sensitive part,
Yeah.
and the laws or structures of knowledge, the categories that stay on the side of the intellect.
Yeah.
So, in other words, that reflection, well, it works for the intellect, so to speak, for understanding, plays the game of Leibniz physical distance and manages to see a whole picture.
Yeah.
When that possibility of measuring is impossible, and Kant refers precisely to the notion of infinity, is the same as Leibniz, that closure that doesn't work. It simply doesn't happen.
So there's no ground.
Well, rather than being grounded, is an intention to close, a need for understanding, and a need for finding a law, and its impossibility. So you have again these vibration. But like that, well, it's rather than together apart, is, to me at least, it's a tentative of drawing a definition around something or having a full picture of it,
Yeah.
which can't be concluded.
Yeah.
So rather than being the negative of something as it comes up in that drawing, it is a circle that doesn't close. I always think when we're looking at Sublime, that obviously Kant wrote in Romantic times, when the Sublime was a very big concept in art and literature, and it was seen as something that was beyond the beautiful, a feeling mixed of beauty and terror, which Kant himself, I think the first two paragraphs of the Analytic of the Sublime, says it's not what he's after. He's after something much more abstract. Sorry, I have to find the paragraph in Italian book and then translate it into English. It is the Analytic of the Sublime.
Sorry. It could be the Sublime is an aesthetic experience that explains the feeling of anxiety and pain and pleasure at the same time.
It is paragraph 23 of the second book, Analytic of the Sublime.
That's awfully close to tragedy. Pity, Aristotelian pity and fear.
There is that
Actually, the
there
Sublime
is
and the
this
tragedy, I
element of-
think, are very close.
Yeah.
there
But
is
the tragedy is related with time.
Yeah.
Not maybe, it's a fatal fate. At the
Yeah.
end, you know that it's going to end in bad things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something like that.
Do you want to know where you've gone wrong?
Yep. Go on.
You've got the empiricist subjective view on the left and the Leibniz on the right, but you're talking about sensibility and understanding, how you described it there.
Yeah.
So that reflective category that Mattia was talking about. So Leibniz was saying 2 drops of water are identical, these are rationalists, they're absolutely identical.
Yeah.
But what the concepts of reflection do is say, well, that belongs on the right, like you've got there, but they're in different spaces, 2 concept walls. So the rational thing positions the thing like you've got on the bottom, so that right and left. But the categories of understanding, if you have a concept that is greater than the sensibility of a rational idea that can't be presented in an experience on that side, or an aesthetic idea on that side that can't be respected in concepts, okay? None of that's got anything to do with the Sublime, because you're missing a part which is the ideas of reason. You've got sensibility and understanding, which is the categorical performance in Kant.
Yeah.
So you've got the category of quality, quantity. I know you don't know this, but I'll just jump in anyway. You've got quality, quantity, relation, and modality as categories of understanding. So for any objective experience, or any possible objective experience, any judgment takes the categories along with them through these other principles, like the axiom of the intermission, which puts the categories into time. So you've got those 2 sides, basically. And there's also a schemata there in this little Kantian ship. But the problem is that the Sublime has to do with ideas of reason. There should be another circle out there on the right, even further right to your body, your word side.
Can't we add it?
You could just add another circle on the right and put it under unconcealment, sort of over on the right side, because you've got these ideas of reason are things that cannot be met with in experience, and moral ideas. And it's those that are to do with the Sublime, not the understanding as you.
Yes.
They're ideas in reason. So the ideas of
talks
reason
about
of God.
distinguishing between beauty and the sublime.
So what you've done is you've kind of got the beautiful, as it were.
Yeah.
Which is where the beautiful is the sensibility that doesn't match up to a concept. The beautiful is without a concept, unlike the agreeable, which has a concept. Taste has a concept in that sense. The agreeable and charming has a concept, and the good has a concept stuff, but the beautiful doesn't. But with the Sublime, you're not talking about the categories of understanding. They don't come, well, they do come into it in a very technical sense, but you're talking about ideas of reason. It's them that do not go into the sensibility. So concepts of, when you said about being formed, the blindness, that was right, about being the thing is formless, the sensibility, the thing in sensibility was without form. But that's where the parallel is, it's not with the categories which you've got there, with your SR, your signifying chain. It goes over into the ideas of reason that are the thing that, as you say, it's the attraction and repulsion. So cosmological ideas, moral ideas that don't. So when you have, and also it's because, let's say you had the great big storms and that kind of thing as the sublime, or the great big gigantic, as you called it. It's the fact is it's your ability to go beyond the sublime in the understanding of, say, measure or magnitude. That you have an understanding in infinity, which is your sublime. The feeling is in with you, in yourself, not in the object. So you kind of
Experience.
yeah, you big yourself up. It's not experiencing in the sense of sensibility experience. It's your own experience of the feeling of, in my ideas, I can understand infinity, which is not something you can meet with experience. It's an idea of reason. It's not met within experience. You can't meet infinity in things. But we have an idea of infinity within things, the greatness of something, or an art object that doesn't, add up. Would be like an aesthetic idea if you understand it in terms of categories and stuff, but you can go further than that, push it into the idea of aesthetic, but then it becomes the art, it's not a play of forms, it actually becomes formless, and then you start playing around with these ideas against. So it's in the movement of ideas that are outside experience that is the play off with the sublime, if you can see what I mean. So moral ideas are outside experience, ideas of the good. You don't really meet with the good, they're what you impose and stuff. And that's where the greatness lies, in your playing with these ideas outside of experience. So that's what's missing from your picture. You have sensibility, yeah, which you've got S1 on the side of Hume, yeah. You've got the categories, which is the rational on this side, which every time you make a judgment they play into experience. They're necessary for experience. Objects of experience, any object experience has these categories of quality, quantity, unity, plurality, totality, these kind of things, and they have to then be rationalised in terms of time. But for the sublime, it's got nothing to do with that. It's the ideas outside of experience that are related to things in sensibility. That is where the movement comes in like that. So that's what's missing with that.
Perhaps it might help thinking.
Ideas outside of experience.
Yeah, like ideas of like God. You can't be God. But there's even halfway houses like society. You can't go and point to society. It's not within experience. As you say, it's a word. So these are ideas of words. You can play around ideas with societies and make different associations with it. Yeah, ultimately, you will, if you then go back through the categories and stuff. But this is not what he's doing. He's playing within ideas of. So when you're looking at a big storm or a big sea, the oceanic feeling and stuff, it's the fact that you can comprehend something beyond what you're seeing. This is the great nature which is overwhelming you in a big storm and stuff, and all the rest of it, or a big war even, or something like this. You're watching it and stuff, but you have ideas of infinitude, and things like that, or moral worth, or things like this, things, or these kind of things in that are just sort of ideas that aren't to do. So that's how the play operates. That's how you read it.
At the beginning of in October, we spent one seminar looking at the notion of beautiful in the idea of the beautiful in Kant. It might help putting things in chronological order because it helps a lot. Kant first writes a critical theorism about understanding, not knowledge. I have data from experience, and I have categories in the intellect that organize them with the famous overinflated description that data from experience are blind by themselves, and abstract intellectual categories are empty in themselves. It wants, as you pointed out, bring together the two strands, the empiricist and the rationalist that divided modernity since Descartes. Then after that, he writes a critique of practicalism which is the morals, according to it's about social and moral laws and how you deal and approach what is good. However, the two remain separate, because how do you then use the good in practical terms, which is with all the data you've organized with knowledge, and vice versa, how do you organize properly morally what you have? So it drives the third critique, the critique of judgment, which is judging. It properly sits in between the two. And the critique of judgment is divided in two parts: aesthetic judgment and teleological judgment. The teleological judgment is a moral kind of judgment, according to what is good, what is a priori laid down as finality or final cause, and is in a certain way far less intriguing than the aesthetic judgment. Because in the aesthetic judgment, Kant brings this faculty of judging onto thought itself and calls it reflection. And is where he says that reflection does not judge according to a concept. And there is no modality or causality or finality as for understanding. It just judges. So if he's saying beauty does not have a concept. You cannot define what is beautiful, and yet you can say something is beautiful. You can state it, but there is no definition of it. Because what he says the aesthetic judgment does is to find that there is an accordance between data and laws. Doesn't matter which. Is what Johnny calls finding a logic, recognizing which form of coherence is there. Doesn't matter which one, but there is something that holds together or there isn't. You remember we were discussing about this painting about it. That was part of it. The problem of the sublime, which falls within aesthetic judgment, is that finding out this logic becomes problematic. Or it could be found at infinity, so it cannot be found in our lives. And that's the problem that Lyotard picks up and links to Heidegger, in my understanding. Because for Heidegger, equally, you can find being, capital B, just in infinity, so you never find it. And vice versa, the totality of a small being in time, society, you can never embrace it all. You're part of it. You just have a limited perception and experience of it.
Yeah.
So that's the bridge between, to me, the bridge that links Lyotard sees between the reflection of the faculty of judgment and Kant as we saw it in the last few weeks. But it's not so, it doesn't separate as in your second drawing. If the first two some sets that overlap might work in a certain way, it doesn't in the second, because what Kant says, and you're right when you say it's not very different than some Freudian forms of economy, like let's say which one I mean, is that what Kant would like to do is closing these two areas, all the data and all the laws, in one circle. But some can, and you have an overlapping part. And then some can, but you don't have all that is left out. You just have an open circle. And that's where the Sublime plays this game. And it says it here somewhere. I think I can find it.
So,
you know what, when in Freud joke and the unconscious,
Yeah.
one of the Freud goes around it saying that what makes us laugh is that there is an expectation, as you were saying, about the category.
Yeah.
And then this expectation is delayed or just misplaced big. So there's an amount of energy that is building up, is dammed up, what Freud says. And then it's released all in one go. And it becomes a burst of laughter. And there is Lyotard draws a parallel between these and the problem of the sublime. It's something never fully aligns. But never fully aligns because it is impossible to close the definition, not because something it is a negative of something.
so instead of that being negative, those two, as in this, yeah, in this, that should opening.
I would open the segment in the top diagram. Yeah.
Yeah. So it opens them up instead of like kind of takes away part of the.
You realize that there are some things that cannot be closed.
Something is missing. Like,
Not missing.
there is no link.
It's something cannot be fully. The problem it really goes on. It is Sublime as a dynamical open version in terms of might or strength, and Sublime as mathematical proper infinities of numbers that can't be all thought before you encounter them.
You know the cuspid valve in the heart, like the cuspid valve that kind of can move. It's a delimitation or a border, but it's mutable. I see this as like that. It's mutable. But it's very important that the delimitation's there, otherwise you've got psychosis.
Okay, and how do you link it then to Sublime?
Yeah, I'm reading the Sublime in relation to what I know about, which is comedy and tragedy.
It's not out there, actually, I believe it is exactly, or it is exactly, it is one way of...
Because they're all spasms.
They're all spasms. Something else happened in the spasms, which is the breaking down of the possibility of verbal articulation.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the key of the hoped for or ideal or idealized, to stay more close to Kant, translatability of all experiences into words shows itself as impossible.
Yeah.
Not totally, but the totality of it becomes impossible. So you have patches, you have parts that overlap and work very well, but you can't.
Jacques Rancière has a lovely quote when he's talking about parole muette, silent speech. He says, parole muette is a deaf and silent obstacle to all forms of signification. And I think the dummy's body in the scenario that I used to sort of illustrate this is a beautiful example of parole muette. It's silent and yet it kind of wipes all the other meaning aside. And I think that's sublime. Is that sublime?
And what is Jouy's answer? How do you describe it? How do you describe that? Is that
Jouy sounds, yeah.
You can't really describe it. That's the whole point of jouissance. Because it's a French word firstly, so it can't be really like. I don't think you can accurately translate it into English, but it basically means it's not pleasure, because Barthes differentiates between pleasure and bliss. It's more.
It's like ecstasy.
It's more like orgasmic, if that makes sense, like a pure bliss, but it also can extend into what's too painful to be blissful. So that definitely is related to the sublime, but it's also it relates to pain or terror that's too, it's beyond what's pure bliss is. But it's not really, it's not pleasure, it's a different thing. But there's no real word in English, I think, that can
I think ecstasy is the closest.
I
ecstasy, yes.
a quote of, I don't remember who said, a cigarette is the perfect example of pleasure because it's delicious and always gives you
Totally.
get you satisfied. So it's kind of, it's pleasure, but you don't feel good about it.
Yeah.
There is elements beyond control.
Can't never let you give you satisfaction.
It's interesting to look into like how you translate that word, because in Polish we do use that word. I'm sorry, we do use that word in Polish, and it means actually not knowing or like not being able to decide or being kind of which one?
Playful. It doesn't.
And it's kind of allows you to, you not really know what's happening, what it is. So it's not. It actually means undefinable. Instead of
linguistically, it's not something you can
well, it does have
articulate. It's kind of it's something you can like you talk about beautiful. We know what it is, and you can sort of relate to it, but you can't specifically define linguistically what it.
Well, that's interesting because jouer obviously means to play. So in the Polish, then you're using it in its literal sense.
We like assimilated that word, which happens in languages, but we're using it when something.
No, but jouer sounds comes from joy, joie, not
Yeah.
from jouer as into play.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it kind of abandons that meaning, you know, when
But
it was
what I'm saying is
assimilated,
the
kind of
Polish
lost the
is
meaning
like
originally,
taking
but it
roads and
has still the meaning of unknown, like not undefinable.
Psychoanalytically,
Still
it relates
there.
to the child. When the child has, before you know, you have laws and conventions imposed on you. You have, it's more of a sensate thing. It's like a body
You're just
pleasures. You know, when you're literally like,
pre-linguistic.
well, yeah, like pre-linguistically, and you're shitting and sucking and doing all the things that babies do. That's when there's pure jouissance. It's just.
And it's the oceanic feeling that you refer to as well. But it's also another kind of concept that's relevant, but I'm not able to be precise about how, is Kristeva's notion of the abject. Because, and the crucial thing about the abject is, it changes your identity. You have to look away from the abject in order to stay who you are. If you face it, it changes you. And I think tragedy, the political power of tragedy, is that everyone who is in the audience experiencing it comes out a different person.
I believe you're right on this, especially if you link it to the political power. This is the paragraph 23, analytic of the Sublime, the second paragraph. But some significant differences between the beautiful and the sublime are also readily apparent. This is Kant himself. The beautiful, paragraph 23.
Yeah.
I'm reading the sublime second paragraph. The first time it goes.
There are, however.
There are some significant differences between. This is probably different translation. Because the beautiful in nature concerns the form of the object, which consists in the objects being bound. But the sublime can also be found in a formless object, the feeling that Mark was describing of experience itself, of reflection. Insofar as we present unboundedness, either as in the object or because the object prompts us to present it. Well, yet we are to this unboundedness of thought, this totality. So the unboundedness, this is why I wrote what to say, is the key that Kant gives to describe sublime.
Yeah.
So all the
That's why you want the circle to have a gap.
yeah. And so it's not the negative of what has been bound or described.
It's what's being pushed out by it.
No, it's not pushed out. It's what cannot be taken in.
Yes, okay. What cannot be taken? Yeah.
But it's not the same. What cannot be taken in is not because it is one source and says, oh, this is a pen, this is a pencil, and I got more collecting pencils.
Yeah.
It's because there are so many pencils I cannot give you a final definition of the pencil, just to make it very, very flat. Because you can never describe all the joy of an orgasm, if you want to stay with what they were saying.
Yeah.
You can't put it in words.
Well, I'm saying the idea of unlimited is an idea of reason. It's not met within
Yes.
experience, so it's met within us, and that's where the sublime thing can come from, because we have that sensation of our own ideas, you know, the greatness and or the greatness or the not so great, or the opposite of greatness is within
Meagerness.
the meagerness of our ideas, and that's attraction and repulsion at the same time.
But also, the other thing I want to say, is that the judgment that gives rise to beauty or sublime feelings is one kind of judgment. There is judgment in knowledge, but that's the judgment that Kant calls deterministic or determining. It tells us something about the object. Aesthetic judgment instead tells us something about the subject. Not only is the judgment that doesn't use a concept doesn't apply a concept, but also says nothing about the object. Another very classic quote is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's not banality. What Kant says with this is that you're not saying the object is beautiful, it's that I judge it beautiful. It is my Lyotard picks up a lot on this issue of feeling, the tool that feels itself. So he opens it up to a completely different side. Rather than thinking told as something rational and verbal, there is another side entirely, which cannot be accounted for, exactly as you were saying.
So beauty in the eye of the beholder isn't beautiful in Kant, is it?
No, I brought it up like that, but as an example. It's not as banal as it sounds. It's just because the feeling of beauty is not representing something that is in the object. It is representing the relation between.
Yeah. It's subjective, isn't it?
Imagination
I mean, the feeling of
understanding.
beauty
Imagination
is
understanding.
subjective.
Yeah, which is the
But
right.
subjective does not mean that
Not
it's,
subjective in those terms, but in
No,
terms of it's your personal.
no, it's not
No.
personal, as in yours is going to be different than his about the same object. It is subjective because it is something that happens inside the subject.
Okay.
It is because it is something that organizes, or better, verifies that there is a link, no matter what link,
Yeah.
between the data you've taken from experience and the categories of understanding to organize them.
Okay.
So playing the beautiful between the sensibility on the left there and the rational on the right, between the sensibility and the understanding. There's a play between them which demands in the beautiful in Kant universal assent. It's kind of what I call the wow factor. When you wow, it's this, you kind of express that to everyone, and it kind of express it's not in the eye of the beholder.
But do you think
In the
it's
eye of the beholder, that becomes what he calls the agreeable, and it's based on an interest in the sense. This beautiful is unprejudiced, it's disinterested, unlike the agreeable, which is where you have interest in the thing. Usually, if it's sensation, like you like a sweet, you want more. That kind of thing. That's agreeable.
But don't you
Don't mention it.
But that's because its interest is in the sense, in the senses. Where in the play of the beautiful, there's no interest like that. But it can be followed.
but it is
can be followed
formed by
interest.
time and culture though, because the
He's not going to say that. No, he's going to say because time and culture belong to the concept. They belong to concept. But in the idea of the sublime, you're right. Yes, culture does play a part in the idea of the sublime because you're playing with ideas over against the sensibility.
Yeah.
So culture is required for understandings in the sublime. But he's going to say that if you're talking about culture and understanding, then you're talking about the agreeable or the good or the charming. His idea of the beautiful is this really radical sense so that it demands universal assent. It doesn't mean like empirically, you don't have to go around and ask who likes, then the biggest vote wins. It's just what I've got to say, it's like that word for you're just faced by something you just can't, you just ejaculate like, wow, wow! And everyone hears you and they look at you. And it's just where you think something is, no one could disagree.
Yeah.
Of course, then 3 seconds later, you might change, that's time. But in that moment, that is the beautiful, and it's not beauty in the eye of the beholder, ever. So it's a really interesting idea that he develops in that, because otherwise, as you say, it's all like in the eye of the beholder. Can I have a question?
Yeah.
How does Jouison join to is it La Petite?
The peat.
Yes.
The little.
How do you
The
say?
little of the petite.
Oh, the pitié.
Yes, that's it. How does
The
Jouison join to how's the relation between?
yeah.
Because you've got the spasm you were talking about.
It's a lack, and I've just been because I see this as a very sort of negative space which relates to sculpture, I think. And an example I would give of it, which kind of triggers the petit a, is this is from a paper I wrote when I went to Dallas, but it's an example of a photograph that Edward Bond saw when he was writing a particular scene in a play, and he said that while he was writing this scene, he was thinking of this image, and it was very useful for me in sort of understanding what he was doing in the scene. But he says that in the photograph there were 3 mothers and some 6 or 7 children from Belsen concentration camp shortly after it had been liberated, and they were having a picnic. And the parade ground was empty, except a short distance from the picnickers. There's and there are 3 mothers and 6 or 7 children. There's a stack of corpses, and it's the negative space which expresses the meaning in that photograph, because it's the space between children and corpses, children with their mothers eating food, you know, the whole kind of life-death thing. It's the space in between them. And I think that speaks of the sublime, speaks of that negative space. So meaning is made in terms of physical contiguity rather than image, and that strikes me as being a very sculptural thing.
Sorry, say it again, meaning?
Meaning's made in terms of physical contiguity, you know, how close or far away you are from something. It's not the image, it's the gap between them, which is so small, which is what shocks you in that image. So it's a negative space, it's a lack, which is what the petit
I
is.
think about the distance we talked about there with the Kantian categories, the whole Kantian animal, I think about the whole Kantian of the categories understanding, you know, the sensibility categories of understanding and the ideas of reason. That whole thing has to deal with objects. And what you're talking about distancing in the Kantian thinking would really be a kind of Newtonian understanding of spatial awareness, right? But what Heidegger does, he parallels with the existentials, the categories in Kant. So instead of having a spatial category in Kant, which would be literally measurements and, you know, Euclidean geometry, when you parallel with the existentials parallel, not identity, they're not identity, but they parallel the ontological in Kant with the existentials. So that's why I say things like Heidegger talks about people being space-ish or time-ish.
Yeah.
They operate within time, it's very active, whereas the Kantian is very passive.
So
But
if you're
so when you're talking about distance and
Yeah.
stuff, it's like I always think of this distance and spacious is like, you know, when, you know, I'm physically close to Oscar here, but I know Mattia better, so we're closer in that sense, you know, that kind of sense. So that's Kantian, object, you know, Oscar. And then mentally existential, because I've known him a long time, you know, I know that he's going to start moaning about the cold in a minute or something like that. You know? that's different. So when you're talking about distance, you see, on the Kantian side, you know, that's one understanding, and that's just a tool on the table. But if you start going down the Heidegger line, there's a different understanding. So which way are you jumping?
See, I think you're time-ish if you pay attention to signifiers, because signifiers are temporal, or symbolic signifiers are temporal things, because you have to learn them and you have to remember them, and then they become habitual. And
So,
you're space-ish if you pay more attention to objects, and you can have really interesting kind of scenarios where what you see and what you hear don't agree with each other, and that's another of Kant's
do you know
categories.
the Lacan's discourse thing, squares?
Yeah.
You know that? You know the discourse of the university? You know? That?
Oh, the master-servant.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
You know you have the square, you have the one, you have the place of truth, don't you? The place of the agent, the place of the other, and the place of production.
Yeah.
Maybe it's my
The
brain.
discourse of the university, you have truth and signifier. Well, the place of truth, you have the signifier one, your signifier.
Yeah.
The place of the agent, you have S2, which is the signifying chain. And the place of the other, so you have the PTR, hence my question, A,
Yeah.
and then the space of production, the bar S,
Yeah.
the spoken subject. So in the place of truth, signifier one on here, let's see, where, you know, does the sublime coming in the other, in the petit R, because of the lecturer, who's, you know, yourself, who's in the place of the agent doing this signifying chains and stuff. How does the signifying chains relate to the petit R in the other? Is there a sublime relation there?
It's the lack in the other.
It's the lack. So in what you are saying, it's the fact that I'm kind of not getting that movement. Is something like that? Is that the distance you maybe?
God, I have to go
My
back.
not my example, this is something that's just relating to my research, so this has been swimming around in my brain. Maybe this doesn't make sense when I speak it out loud. What I'm thinking of in relation to this, particularly with talking about jouissance, and this is what Christopher talks about, is in abstract painting is a good example of, for example, colour field painting, which she talks about colour as being something that you can't describe. Like, I can say this is blue, but how do you actually describe blueness? So blueness exists as blueness, but you can't say how you can't describe. If someone's colourblind, you can't describe what pink is, or you can't describe what blue is. So it's something that you experience within, but that's something I think that's especially what post-Lacanian Christian talks about.
Yeah.
That's there's a disconnect between the signifier and the signifier. It's like the free play of the signifier. It's just colour. Colour's not linked to form, or it's just the.
And that puts it in the Sublime.
Yeah, and that's I would say
it's formless. Yeah.
Sort of Rothko is a good example of what people have talked. You know, people talk about his work, that you could experience his paintings or being in the Rothko chapel or whatever, and that initiates. Could be perceived as a sublime because it initiates fear in some of the dark paintings, or different feelings with other paintings. But it's through visually, it's through colour, and you can't.
There are no forms, no representation.
But there's no chain. There's no like signifying chain as such. It's just colour, which is or has been argued as literally as a signifier, something that's in free play that has no connection or chain with anything else.
But then if we want to bring it right, like you're absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right. I agree with what you're saying. It sounds. And I was thinking Wittgenstein raises the same problem about describing colours. Sticks of red, red, and blue is the same story. You can say that something is definitely red. Is this still red? Is it reddish? Is this still red, or is already going to another colour?
Or is this even red when it changes?
This is certainly red. I believe almost everybody will agree that this is red. This is reddish. When do you finish calling something red and you put it brown or orange or that problem? So identity is a curve that is very high in the center and then tapers off. That's improbably to the ends. But then, because you brought in color, it makes me think that we can try to start bringing these home for artistic purposes. And thinking, if you cannot describe, you can name it, you can point at it, you can use it, you can make a paragon or use it. This is like some sort of, not this blue, but sky or sea, whatever, banana examples. Then you have the same problem with an artist, because maybe you can describe an artist, but you cannot describe its meaning. Maybe you can describe its look, but not its meaning. So and that's why the Sublime has become so relevant for artistic thinking recently, obviously through the lens of Heidegger, because it's much more for an art concerned less with beauty and more with its meaning. The fact that there is something that can be fully described, fully articulated, has this. It's not simply the Sublime as beyond pleasure and pain, but it's something that again cannot be contained.
It's like the notion of triangularity or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, we know what triangles are, but the notion of triangularity in itself is not. It's something again not met with in experience. But I know with colour Kant would disagree. Sometimes can work a concept I can't explain. Can't remember why, but I think the argument is that like the triangularity is not met with. That there's too many reds. That the rational idea has too much sensibility involved in it. But at the same time, you still can formulate an idea of what red is and colour is.
Can I? I'll just leave most of it there. We can say, we can define something or describe that or something up to a point, to a certain percentage. And one of the, and I was thinking of these recently, the ultimate definition is like a pyramid. Arrive to a certain point, and then the vertex is to be, it's not that. You have to, it goes to infinity, the closing point of the description. Kant was tried by the Prussian censor for writing a book on God, where more or less he says that God is the projection to infinity of all the moral values of humanity, something like that. Because it takes God away from being an entity with an essence, something that is, and becomes a regulative idea, something that we suppose and project in order to organize a much lower circulation, lower circulation of things.
I may add something. I think the point of infinity there, it's slightly different. It doesn't go like this. It's go to this, to the certain point, and then it's open.
You never reach the point. This is why.
Yeah, but it doesn't go there. After those, it's just
it opens
open.
up again.
Yes.
So it's even more dramatic than these. Say more about it.
At the moment, I'm just running away.
Sorry, like that. And then you did.
It's also yes, there are some connection to my work as well, but at the moment of defining a recognition of the of anything, not just object subject. Anything.
Yes.
Yes, it goes to the certain point of able to recognize something, but then after that it's open to the even speculation of the about the object.
So it's running what often Johnny calls undecidability. Or it's just open when
it's enter area of, as you said, never approaching the point.
Unboundedness as what we had before.
Is something that's tending but doesn't reach. Asymptotic, is that what you're trying to say?
Asymptotic that doesn't reach a symptoms, yes.
It's like an insistence or something that's tending, but it doesn't reach.
What's the word? I just couldn't hear from that.
Asymptotic. Yeah.
Asymptotic.
Asymptotic.
Asymptotic. Like symptom.
Yeah.
What's that then?
It's when a line converges. So say something like y equals 1/x is something like. So these lines, they sort of converge on these axes, but they never meet. They get closer and closer, and they exponentially increase, but then they still never hit the points.
Almost, but not quite.
It gets infinitely nearer, but it's always infinitely
But
far
also
away.
it slows down. The nearer it gets, the slower it goes to the point. So it's like dividing the segment and then dividing the half, and then the other half, the 40, and 16.
So the axes are sort of their boundaries, but they're not really boundaries
Because the system, isn't it? Is when it couldn't be defined by the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Never touch the system.
Yeah, exactly. The line's still there, but
Me.
they don't hit these markers, the best of markers. They exist outside the line.
That's like what Matthias said at Deridian indecidable. Like he says, like a ghost that's there but it's not there. It's like two things simultaneously.
Right?
And it's a little bit the same like that you told last week when you speak about the impossibility of represent the circle, because you always have an error there that you cannot.
Do it perfect. So.
Pi is an irrational number.
Maybe
Goes.
I was jumping to is another way into this problem, just to see from the different level. In Kant's work, aesthetic is presented in two different ways. In the critique of pure reason, so in his analysis of how we know things, how we understand them, aesthetic is what comes to the senses, and is a priori form of intuition of space and time. It's very Newtonian in that. Every body, that is every single body, happens at the point in space at the moment in time. And nothing is given, no phenomenon is given outside these parameters. When, this is a very specific notion of aesthetic that really stays with the original Greek meaning of the Greek word. What aisthanama is something becoming sensible, as in touchable and feelable in the sense. In the critique of judgment, aesthetic returns in completely different terms. Because yes, there is a sensation, that is a sensation of thought upon itself, thought that feels itself working somehow. It is a complete reflexivity of its activities, of its work.
Thought that feels itself,
yes.
Feeling that thinks itself.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And Lyotard pushes this or picks up on this because obviously
that's the tautogorical.
That's tautogorical, and is what is at the core of the judgment that is a reflexive judgment, the aesthetic judgment, and is not a determining judgment, the one of knowledge that is called this is black, tensor to fly, because now it's empty, or something is soft, this kind of thing. But it still has an element of sensitiveness or sensation. It is no longer only a rational thought. Thought in this self-reflexivity shows a side of sensation to itself. And it seems to me that Lyotard within the lines, really, or not only within the lines, really wants to push these elements that there is something beyond or beside the rationality, the linearity of thought, the understanding, that is far more important, or equally important at least, in the working of thought, that then leads to an aesthetic judgment. So much that for the tautogorical, as Mark brought up, Lyotard says that there is a different temporality altogether. Different temporality, which is not the temporality of a body in a point in space in a moment in time. That is a completely different flow of time, which relates to this subjective, internal feeling of thought, feeling itself, thinking, feeling itself, working, really judging. So, what seems to me Lyotard is after is pointing out how the Sublime is a much bigger, or the misalignment in the Sublime is a far more important element than the 20 and odd pages that are just a critical judgment, because it is something that actually is at the core of judgment itself, and the form spreads.
It's the core of postmodernism.
Yeah.
It's like making the ordinary weird.
Yeah.
Strange. Because Kant's got the theoretical world, which you're talking about there, the Newtonian world with that aesthetics as sensation, as space and time, and then this other kind of aesthetics. But the theoretical around space and time, which he does in the first critique, and then the second, in the second critique of practical understanding, which is that will of moral understanding. But art is a technical practical, so it's not in that Kantian thing at all, as you described. It's not in the Newtonian critique of pure reason at all, but it comes, as you say, it's why it joins up it comes in the centre. It joins a moral world with the theoretical world, which is why the critique of judgment is one that joins the two critiques, and why the analytic of the Sublime, why postmodernism takes off from that point, because, as you say, one is just how we relate to objects. One is a moral, practical realm, but art is a theoretical practical, so it becomes part of this moral will, it's part of our projection or something, height would call it throwness or facticity, one of these structures of care in Heidegger. Heidegger has a design parallel. Design parallels Kant's subject, but of course it's concerned with its existence, not with its relation to objects. And then of course it has the care, so it's its main structure again in Heidegger, whereas on this side the care comes in when you put the whole conceptual machinery together, theoretical and practical and the judgment, then that works. That's why the Heidegger is much more active in that sense, whereas Kant's much more passive.
With these, another problem comes up, which I was going to the question. In the first chapter about the reflexive judgment, Lyotard makes, precisely because this misalignment is at the core of the postmodern, brings up, because I don't know, making a distinction between subject and subjective.
Yeah.
Did you pick up on that?
I relate subject to identity because I think we can. Lyotard mentions Aristotelian topoi and topography in relation to this, and I think we can map Freudian topology onto it. So the Lacanian 3 registers. So I think we could say this is the iconic or imaginary or Freud's ego identity. The symbolic or Freud's superego. And this is the index. Lacan's real, Freud's id. And the postmodernism is very interested in the id, isn't it? It's interested in the illogical, the irrational. So that's why I think the Sublime and this sort of area challenges identity, and that's what makes it so incredibly politically radical. But I don't think postmodernism understands this, because postmodernism has become very sort of unpolitical. Because I don't think the challenge to the identity has been understood in artistic sense.
I'm not familiar enough with the terms you use, so I'm sort of contemplating them.
Do you want me to explain them more? Iconic signifiers resemble their object. So an iconic sound is something that sounds like, but isn't the real thing.
And it is the real sound, or is it the body that emitted the sound?
It mimics it. It's mimesis. Iconicity is mimesis.
Okay, I'll go ahead and see.
Yes, I mean, an icon is never the object. It's
No.
the icon to point the object.
It's a representation of the
So
object.
the iconic sound is not the body that has emitted the sound or
No.
the real sound.
It resembles it.
It resembles.
The iconic signifier resembles its object. The symbolic signifier substitutes for its object. So if you think of it in terms of...
So the iconic signifier is a simulacrum. It looks like, but it is not.
Yeah. And you get loads of iconic signifiers, and you get the hyperreal. The examples I give is Narcissus looking at his own reflection. It's an icon, but he mistakes it for an index. He thinks there's somebody really in the water, but it's him. And in a way, that's describes the whole of the Lacanian mirror stage, which is a mistake. It's a sort of turning inside out. You get the bodily relation to something wrong. You don't realise it's a reflection. And this describes the ego. But you can see why people mistake iconic signifiers for the real thing, because at least they resemble them. But why do they mistake the symbolic signifier for the thing itself? If we think of Pavlov's dogs, he rings a bell every time the dog's being fed. So the bell starts off as an index to food. It's contiguous with food. It happens at the same time as they get their food. And then he delays the food for longer and longer between the bell. So the bell becomes a symbol for food. So they still start salivating.
I always wonder if at a certain point reverts his judgment and thinks the bell means no food. But,
at some point you would think, but I've just been training a puppy and I can tell you can fool them every time.
So the first judgment counts more than the following one.
Yeah, so
there it is the problem with education. At the beginning you were educated badly, at the end
yeah,
it's impossible to,
you're stuck.
to wash your mind.
It's because they don't have the reflective understanding, which will put the thing in sensibility, and they can divorce themselves from the sensibility of the thing and think about it. It's more like, I think it's more like Leibniz's rationalization of the water droplet as being identical. So every time the bell rings, it's an identical. It's a combination of the sense and the understanding of the animal, but it can't divide. It can't say that the location is different. There's something wrong. There's no food coming.
It's how symbolic signs work. And it's why it's so easy to mistake them for indices. I mean, icons are easier because they at least resemble their object, you know. So, but symbols don't resemble their object; they just stand in for it. But habit is such a thing.
Maybe this is.
Whereas indices, if we're talking about the real. Is that a pizza?
I want to give an example of the Sublime.
I thought you were going to eat. It is a pizza.
It's a Spanish omelette.
Ah, cool.
Sublime because you are not going to understand that it's only potato, onion, and eggs. something is missing.
We're going to start salivating now.
That's good. Yeah,
It's fantastic.
Did you make it?
no, actually no. My girlfriend does.
I was going to say.
But I prepare a really good one.
Now we're in the real.
Almost as good.
Almost as good.
Spanish.
Brilliant.
Send it round.
So yeah,
I love
it's basically if you play
You're right.
violin,
What's your idea?
you hear violin. You hear violin, but it's not the sound of the violin.
It's recorded.
And then you have
It's gonna be enough.
play keyboard and
Big
it
two.
sounds like violin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mistaken for
Yeah.
violin.
Yeah.
Singers.
Yes,
So
Yes,
that's
it is.
iconic.
similar.
But I believe that if we enter this problem that Lyotard brings up,
Yes.
if we enter this
Well,
problem that
do you
Lyotard
eat eggs?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
well,
I
he's
didn't space there.
brings up
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
subjective and
It's fine.
subjectivity
I should
from this point, which is not wrong, but we still miss something. You might remember in the past weeks that, although we didn't read it, Johnny brought up several times the Cartesian doubt as what constitutes the core of the subject. So I doubt, therefore I am, or I think, therefore I am. So you cannot go any further back than that. And that has remained a problem throughout the moderns. Then with Kant, there is a shift because in the subject, at least in the Critique of Judgment, becomes something that is far more dynamic and less and less solid than that. So, Lyotard on page 23, second paragraph down, says the subjective can and must persist as the sensation of itself that accompanies any act of thinking the instant it occurs. It goes on a lot about this persisting, but it starts putting forward the subjective, which is an adjective, is not a thing, is something that accompanies it, is somehow more primary than the subject. So the subject is almost the product of the subjective sensations. So if you think of those lines that create the corner, the vertex of the pyramid, then you can multiply them. You can have a pyramid. I don't know if you still call it a pyramid, but not having endless number of corners, all pointing up to the same apex. But the apex still is not there. So the apex would be the subject. And all the other would be vectors that converge asymptotically. Could be anything at this point, any sort of sensation, from the flavor of the Spanish tortilla you're eating, to the heat, to thinking of Kant, to your history, to my voice, to Britain in the 21st century, everything. And all adding up and intersecting in various ways.
So it creates a surface, doesn't it?
It creates a surface, yes.
The subject is a regulative idea.
That's right.
Sometimes that spectral illusion of the self.
So, what the novelty, if you want to Kant, is that it doesn't say it is either solid soul that certainly exists, it is ungraspable because it's spiritual, or it is only empirical. It's that the subject as an idea is there, and we absolutely need it. That is there as an idea that we need, not an idea that necessarily exists.
Well, the Marxists would say it has to be an agent.
Yeah. And then, yes, you can add that idea of the iconic signifier. But you need to see this passage from...
So you're talking about the subject of something that's not the same thing as the ego?
The ego is deepest on the top, or the top.
In the graph of desire, the imaginary, which I think is iconic and mimetic, is right at the bottom. And then you've got the symbolic, and then you've got the real.
Now, when I say the bottom and top, which one is more, forgive my imprecision, which one is more unconscious and which one is more conscious? The ego is more...
Well, I think the real is... I think most people think that representation, icons and symbols are conscious and the real is the unconscious, but I think it's the other way around. I think because habit makes the use of icons and symbols unconscious.
I would then say, given your very complete explanation of that, summed up what I understand, that these three steps are all in this absent unity. So they come at a later stage. Page 23. Page 25.
I'm only talking about the connection of the subject and language. I'm not talking about written, well, language delivers written in the 21st century. So, but
if you go on page he repeated them on various points, but on page 24, at the bottom of the first paragraph, Lyotard writes, this finality is subjective in that it puts the components of the thinking of the beautiful, that is, of imagination and understanding, together in such a way as to suggest their accord. It suggests their accord. It's not saying that there is an accord there, a solid one, between the things. Thus,
I like David.
Huh?
No, I like your...
I repeat that one subject, that subject, that is one is promised. The subject is promised, it is suggested. It does not say that it can claim it is there. It's not a statement. So it somehow turns things around. It's not that we have a subject and the further out.
Ground is ground.
Yes. And then he goes on, and on page 25, first line says, thus the question of whether the subject of the sublime is the same as the subject of the beautiful makes no sense. There cannot be a subject as a synthesis, as a container, or as agent of sublime feeling, any more than there can be a subject of taste. To say that the sublime feeling is subjective means that it is a reflective judgment, and as such has no claim to the objectivity of a determinate judgment. The determinate judgment is one of knowledge, which instead requires a more solid subject. But again, if we have a subject of knowledge that is more solid and a subject of judgment that is less solid, then we have yet reached the final subject, which is the transcendental unity of our perceptions. It is transcendental. It is beyond the senses, and is not transcendent as something that exists beyond the senses. It is the projection to infinity of that pyramid, in a certain way.
Or is it that only God gets to see the whole?
But God
We
himself,
get to
for
see-
Kant, is a projection to infinity.
So it's that's why it's an idea of reason again,
Yeah.
not within experience again.
Is that what it was?
Yeah,
Castration of the icon, that is. Because it's a big biological object.
I was kind of thinking about what, especially, I understand all that from a point of view someone who deals with theatre very easily. If you think theatre and you go to that, you understand that you can easily get it. There is a moment I remember, that's from training, you remember the training as an kind of acting training when you need to remember the smells, you need to remember the gestures, you need to be an orange and things like that. Yeah, and you learn those things and you kind of, so you need to recall them and you go through the, you basically go subjective what your experience was with a thing, with a cup of tea, then you need to recall that experience and reproduce it again, to basically create icon to the kind of this experience in a way, as an actor, let's say, you need to learn how to do it. And I understand that like not understanding infinity in a way of still experiencing it and yeah.
But still understanding it.
Yeah, I kind of think why
Well,
that
art
has.
is more visceral, is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
because actors would not be
Actors are just
infinity.
mimetic
Yeah, would not be
beings.
infinity there. How do you act infinity or create an icon to infinity? You can't. And for artists, well, you kind of can in a weird, odd, art aesthetic, like weird way you can create. That's why we create art, basically, isn't it? And in a way, and for like kind of someone who, I think from a theatre point of view, you still have this moment of reproduction or a very difficult way of become not representing. Basically, it's very difficult not to represent in a theatre without involving art into it in a way, as in making it performance, making it happening, making something else. And I
What's
kind of,
happened? What's happened?
oh sorry, I'm also thinking about examples of Kant and his theatre.
Yeah.
You mentioned
Yeah,
the
yeah.
dolls, and that kind of came to my head straight away because the deaf class, the whole
Yeah.
performance there, which I love Kant.
I know.
The Canton, so I love him to bits. But no, not because he's Polish. But that's also that. I thought about what those dolls were during the performance. How kind of understanding the existence of the fake humans. I call them Pinocchios, like fake humans kind of thing, and as you said, you know, this joke that he trips on his, at the beginning, tripping on the dead body, him realizing he's dead, and you know, all that. So him being a doll, him not being, him being double represented, basically.
I think another really good example of that is, I don't know if you saw A Fine Balance, the Road to Mystery production at, it was at the Hippodrome a few years ago, and they had puppets in it, and it was amazing puppetry. It was just fantastic. I can't remember what company did it, but they had a child. It's all about sort of these characters. It's very tragic, and if you know the book, it's like an adaptation of Road to Mystery's book. And there's these children who are like street children, and they're made to perform. But one of them was done with a puppet, and they had the child on poles. I think it's used in the front of his book, and they sort of used to throw the child up, and they did acrobatics. And I've actually, because I've lived in Asia for about 3 years, I've seen children doing this. It's really quite frightening to watch. But they used this puppet, and they dropped the puppet. There was this moment in the theatre where they throw the puppet up, and he doesn't catch it, and it falls. And everybody in the theatre gasped, like they believed it was the child who fell. And it was just that moment of believing that that was real. It was amazing. It was the most incredible moment of theatre I think I've ever experienced. It was so
This is the latest thing in postmodern theatre, is the post-human performance.
But it's not the latest. I worked in
Yes,
the theatre in the
yes,
80s, and we did exactly that. We used puppetry. It's been used for years and years and years. I mean, but it's taken to newer levels by technology, really, I think. Being able to create puppets that can move in a very humanoid way. But that wasn't what this was anyway. It was just a pure moment of mimicry, where people believed it was real for that moment.
On a trompe l'oeil, for a moment you're fooled by it.
Yeah. And it just was tragic. It was, everybody gasped. It was just this collective kind of, he struck the child. It was horrible.
That reminds me of this movement of robots and humanoids that are not human, but they have the problems of the human. So we try to understand them, but something is missing because you are not a robot, but you can understand him. Like in the last sequence of Blade Runner, when I don't remember the name, well, the robot or the clone start to say this thing of I have seen ships burning. So you feel like they are feeling the same like you, but there's something that you cannot understand. It's kind of...
So you're on the edge of being conned by the trompe l'oeil or the
Avatar.
iconic.
Yeah.
Yes, why he is human or not human, what is be a human?
The point about Bond's Dummy and Dummy Actor, though, is that you're never fooled by it.
Yeah, that's
Deliberately
the same with
so.
the Kant. The dolls are
They
not.
are-
dolls.
yeah.
We know that they are dolls. It's not like they're
Right,
pretending
because
to
they
be
don't-
humans.
so
Yeah, it's
you're
veiled
going-
ventriloquism.
it is, I feel I have to take it back. The dolls encounter are more about alienation of a solid individual. What this misalignment between human and robot, post-human, is probably closer to what we are discussing. However, one needs to bear in mind very, very clearly that this absence of the solid unity of the subject that Lyotard picks up with so much emphasis in Kant, and probably pushes it, is the key for this play where it looks like but it isn't, or it is but it doesn't look like. Because at this post, here, our subject, since it is not solidly rooted, might float one side or another, or something else can come here as subject one or whatever, but it's or the robot. But it's, one needs to keep in mind, it's very important to me that this is the first step, or better, I insist, Lyotard points at Heidegger as the first moment where the subject is pointed at but not reached. Beforehand in Western thought, the subject was somewhere as something. And this is the first time it opens up. so one cannot jump, or better, it's important to keep in mind when we speak of these symbolic or iconic or all the other things that float about on the upper layers, that it has somehow is rooted, or it's fine to say root in this case here. So all that uncanniness that permits or induces misunderstanding between the real subject and something that isn't, but looks like it, plays in the territory of the sublime.
Yeah, the uncanny, as I understand it, happens when the signifier and the object are no longer kind of lip synced together, but they're, or what you see and what you hear is no longer in lip sync, but you hear something you can't quite see, and it may not trouble you until you get confused as to which is the living and which is the dead, and then it really troubles you, because in a way, if you impute something as having life, which is actually inanimate, but you're sort of looking at it as an animate thing, it kills you off. And then you become like the inert cinema audience who are, behaving as though the images on the screens were real, and they're...
But then what do you make, if lip sync is such a powerful dimension, for such a powerful tool in theatre and cinema, syncing itself, what do you make of it? I mean, that seems to be the most important part of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, and detaching the sync. That's what this does.
Is that not the reflexivity of thought in the static judgment?
It's reversing the mirror stage. And the mirror stage, the mirror is the equal sign that says that this stands in for that, or when you look in a mirror you become confused as to the image or the,
Yeah, but if as Kant does, if one looks at this game before it happens between me and the outside world, but just inside the self, inside the subject, this reflexivity, what syncs and what doesn't sync there? This is the question that Lyotard points out in Kant. For Kant, thought feels itself, and feels itself thinking and organizing, and that gives pleasure. So there is somehow, if you want, maybe just by analogy, a syncing action taking place there. But if that escapes, if thought, feeling itself, thinking, can really grasp what it is thinking, or can really apply its understanding category properly, or its moral category in the right way, then there is a lapse, or a space in between that can be closed. That creates that uncanny reaction you mentioned.
I think it's the difference between the linguistic and the pre-linguistic. So this is the realm of the index.
No, but that is where I believe you're forcing too much psychoanalysis on this. Because if there is anything, is that the linguistic and the pre-linguistic are what thought feels together. And when the two don't align, which is actually what they do all the time, obviously they can't align, then you have the sublime, or the abyss, which is actually a word that comes up a couple of times in the Lyotard himself. There is an abyss. When the sublime game reveals itself, there is no longer ground, there is an abyss.
I think tragedy and comedy are abyssal things.
Let's see if I can find the passage of the
Kind of pleasure and displeasure at the same time. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I don't know if you, as an individual, can experience them both at the same time, but an audience can have some people laughing while others are...
I think you
Like a
can.
vibration then, kind of one,
Mm.
not at the same time, but kind of backwards and forwards between the two, and disjoint in that way. So what I think and I feel is overcome what I think and I feel, which is different from what I think and I feel. So it's revolving this displeasure and pleasure, and that's the kind of pleasure it's
I don't know if you can think without language.
I think you can feel like something is comic and tragic at the same time, maybe black humor or this kind of thing. or the movies of Almodovar, where
Yeah.
something horrible is happening,
Yeah.
but
And you're laughing.
something is
And you hate
humoristic
yourself.
as
Yeah,
well.
that's grotesque is something else. Almodovar is grotesque. It's a specific thing that is as element of one without the other, element of the other without the most painful bits. So I'm looking for the quote where he
The
speaks about
signifier
this.
hits the body and realises it's been wrong. Then you get comic, and when the body tragedies when you're looking at the object and not the signifier, you're with the feeling.
When
And
you
then-
empathise.
Then you get, you're feeling for the other person as if it were you. So all along you've been knitting up this dummy and dummy actor by looking from one to the other because it's a failed ventriloquist and it's not doing it for you. You have to do it. And then you really feel what that dummy actor feels. And then he realises.
But you concentrate a lot on theatre, which obviously is not
Yeah.
what you do, so it makes
Yeah.
sense. Now, if we turn that around, Lyotard, what Lyotard is after is the subject
Mm-hmm.
in Kant's description of Sublime as problem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in such a way I find very interesting that you refer to theatre,
Mm-hmm.
because that subject at the vertex of the pyramid is, between quotation, a representation of the subject. Does it help now bringing together?
Well, that makes it, if it's the subject as seen by others, then that's tantamount to calling, that's like the ego.
It's not as seen
The
by
identity
other
that you're
subject.
given.
It is a subject as seen by the subject. Or in other words, the fact that Lyotard makes a distinction, following Kant, between subject and subjective, and it says there are subjective experiences, which means there are feelings that all together create this funny network of things that is the subject, but the subject is not there to hold them or to contain them beforehand. All the a priori laws and categories in Kant, which seem to be so important for him, are actually rather subjective or abstract. They are those things that are referred to in these movements, in these vectors, in these trends, that generate the image of the subject,
Yeah.
which though can never be reached. So the subject itself, or himself or herself, is not a priori. It's more a product than something that exists, in my understanding of.
That's the same as the ego then. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be something we managed to bring together two fields. But all the other elements, the subjective elements,
And that's what the sublime is challenging,
equally challenging.
the identity,
Yes.
the ego.
It's when we realize that the ego is an image projected rather than a solid, ultimately the ground or and
Yeah.
telos.
The ego and the icon are connected, and mimesis are connected.
Okay. Which I was asked because I don't know enough ego.
It's the Lacanian mirror stage, which is what gives you your ego. It's you see yourself reflected in the mirror of the social surroundings, and that kind of tells you who you are. So if it's a literal mirror, then you see the iconic reflection of yourself, and you adopt that.
My understanding of Kant, no. The point that Lyotard's individuates and brings up in this issue of judgment and judging, which are not exactly the same, is that judging which does nothing. The judgment of judging is the recognition that thought is active. Does it make sense? Is the somehow call it the awareness or the consciousness that thought is thinking. That's the first or the most abstract form of judgment, pure judgment. There's nothing else but the fact of I am active. And this gives the fact that there is something there. So there isn't something there beforehand. What seeing yourself as a mirror presupposes the position of the subject and the society. It seems to me that that would come at a later stage. That's been misleading you that if you look it up like that.
We're going to have distance.
I am unsure. I don't think it is the same. The two are the same, but I don't know how else I can explain it.
Okay.
Let me mark. No.
I'll explain to you how the identity's changed in the play, because the nice young woman that takes in the immigrant to look after him has this image of herself. Her ego is she's a very respectable, nice person who wants to help people. But she doesn't understand the society she lives in, which doesn't allow you to do nice things like helping illegal immigrants. So the consequences that she has to face for doing this nice thing are, you know, she's forced into prostitution, and this is absolutely horrific. So what she does is she has this kind of cognitive dissonance going on between how she sees herself and what she's being made to actually be. And she can't connect the two, or she can't face up to what they are. So she separates them out, and it's quite horrific because she's telling the dummy that she loves him and that she'll always care for him, and it all sounds, it's not religious, but it sort of sounds religious. And then she stabs him. Oh, first of all, she kicks him across the room. And you've got this weird situation where the dummy's kicked across the room and kind of lying there. And then the dummy actor wakes up and comes and takes, for the first time in the play, takes the place of the dummy. And she, for the first time, talks to the dummy actor, and the dummy actor talks to her. And the dummy actor was asleep when she kicked him. Well, he was in a coma when she kicked him, so he doesn't remember. But we, the audience, know that, and she's telling him always how she loves him, how she's going to help him, and we know she's just been really vicious with him. The dummy becomes like a sort of bruise, like a sort of sensate, you know, thing. But it's terribly easy to ignore it. And I think the dummy is just the signified, the body, physicality. Now, if you're the kind of person that pays attention to what you see rather than what you hear, as you are likely to if you're an artist, then you kind of realise that she's telling lies, and the dummy is a punctum that, you know, a parole muette, a Roncierian thing that, you know, kind of makes all the other signifiers in the room turn into lies, because you know she's just abused this person, and it becomes this amazing scene of sort of domestic violence.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I think that all these, it happens once the problem that Lyotard is pointing at has been solved. Because ultimately, what is being said of Kant is that he operated a Copernican revolution, turning inside out the relation subject-reality, where everything happened.
Kant did that, okay.
And if you bear with me, I'll read the two paragraphs. Page 22, at the bottom of this book. Lyotard says, I have chosen the example of Sublime judgment because it responds clearly, that is negatively, to the question of the possibility of a subject. Responds clearly, that is negatively, possibility of a subject. And an aesthetic temporality, both sublime, constituted according to the model of the Ich denke, I think, and the temporality required for theoretical thinking. Theoretical thinking is the one of knowledge. There seems to be no question that the most elementary condition, the synthesis of time, for the synthesis of a self, the self, are lacking here. So in the Sublime, the most elementary condition for the synthesis of self, which supports otherwise the I think of the pure reason, is not present. Yet this falling does not in the least prevent the feeling of the Sublime from being a feeling, that is a sensation, by which thought, reflected in this case, not what was it, categorical or theoretical, sorry, reflected in this case, is made aware of its state. So thought that is made aware of its state through this reflective sensation happens all inside, all before you can have the dedoublement with the outside world. If I understand what you were saying correctly, maybe now you say, but this is precisely what I've been saying all afternoon. Yeah. This state is certainly complex, ambivalent as to the quality of judgment that is made about the object. For thinking says both yes and no to the latter. According and refusing to the object its favor, thinking is both attract and repelled. It remains that the judgment itself, that is the sublime feeling, all the while steadfastly preserves its aesthetic character because it represents, without being grounded on any definite concept of the object, merely the subjective play of mental powers. So the sublime only plays, the aesthetic judgment also the sublime, only plays this internal game, or better, testifies of this internal game, because it is the pure reflection that reflects on nothing else but the fact that something is going on, and that something is an X, is not specified any further.
I love that yes and no, because I think that...
Yes, but the yes and no doesn't leave anything outside. I still think that the positive and negative of the two eggs...
They're supposed to be circles.
I
I don't like why I didn't go into art.
Now we know what is the problem.
So I didn't mean in a
circles,
derogatory way. Just,
you see, this cuspid thing, it can go one way or it can go the other way, maybe. So it can go yes or no.
Okay, let me bring up two more quotes and then we'll try to discuss it. Then this leads into what we read before. The subjective can and must persist as the sensation of itself that accompanies any act of thinking, at least it occurs. And then if you go to the following page, second paragraph, then he said the story of the omelette, where one subject is always suggested on copist. And then the following paragraph says, and this is where it speaks about the abyss, to say, on the contrary, that the relation of the faculties in question in the sublime field, imagination and reason, is cacophonous, it doesn't sync. Does not change the general disposition that places any aesthetic on the side of the subjective or reflective judgment. It seems that feeling must be the opposite of what is in taste. For what is felt in the sublime is not the proper proportion in the free play of the two faculties that are being exercised, but their disproportion and even their incommensurability. An abyss separates them. An abyss that repels and attracts, and imagination is enjoying to present the absolute.
Yeah. Incommensurability. I understand that as being when the signifier and the object don't add up.
Okay, then maybe we have reached the point of where the two stay together. Okay.
Here they add up and here they don't agree.
Okay.
The dummy can't be alive and dead at the same time.
Okay.
And yet he is.
That's because it's unreal, isn't it? Theatre plays with the unreal. I mean,
It's like turning up to your own
Well,
funeral.
It is unreal up to a point, because what is sublime there is not the state of the subject, or better, actor, puppet.
Yeah.
Is the emotion you get.
In the audience.
as an audience. And the emotion is something that you as subject in the audience experience. So it is one.
Yeah, but I think the problem lies in the fact that Bond uses a person to signify the dummy. Because if that
It isn't a person, it's a dummy.
you said the actor, the dummy actor gets up, wakes up.
Yeah, the dummy actor speaks
That's
the
a
words,
disconnect then.
but they always stand far enough away from the dummy not to be able to ventriloquise it. So he's speaking, and he can see things happening to his body, and he's only got words to defend himself, and she's making all these assumptions about immigrants and what they get up to and how they're all thieves and bloody blur, and he's trying to sort of tell her that he's a decent person. But he's only got words to do it.
Yeah, but you said that he wakes up. You said the
After
actor
dummy
wakes
is
up.
dead, then the actor who is the voice of the dummy.
Yeah.
You
is
said the
what
dummy
he
comes
stands
out
up.
of a coma.
Yeah.
Because that's a disconnect, really. It's very.
Can I make two comments here, which I suppose is just to open up things? My problem with, not a problem, the Lacanian way of thinking about linguistics and thinking about meaning is a structuralist, I don't want to label things, construction of things. That seems to me to be conflicted with the notion of the sublime, and we're surely would it be useful to open it up for the rest of the time to think about things post-structuralist, because it's a given anyway that there's a disconnect, that we're not arguing for a disconnect, it's a given that post-structuralist, whether to label it that way or not, understanding of meaning and language, the things are constantly deferred, or there's nothing, there's no chain of things anyway. So that was the first thing I've been thinking about. The second thing is, we're talking about the subject, specifically in a Lacanian point of view, but the subject, well, from my point of view, and obviously I don't know what other people think, there are multiple ways of thinking about the subject, and the Lacanian way of thinking about the subject is a fairly fixed point of view. So what happens if we think about subjectivity in Foucault, or what happens if we think about the subject in Christina when there's no such thing as fixed identity? What happens if we think about the subject when we think about Judith Butler, when subjectivity is a construction, it's a performance reiterated through performative acts? So then this is to me seems like a starting point, but then it seems like the discussion seems to have reached something that maybe these things of thinking beyond those limits are what opens it out.
I think the beauty of the Sublime is that it can challenge those dominant performative discourses that Butler writes about, that she can't see any way beyond.
But they seem to me it seems more aligned with thinking
Yeah,
sort
kind
of
of
post-structuralist way of thinking anyway. So it seems like this is like battling Lacan against, not against, it's trying to fit them together, if that makes sense. And let's just comment.
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking at Sublime, and we talk about orgasmic and kind of unknown orgasmic in a way, uncanny orgasmic. Can I say that? I don't know, maybe. But I kind of thought about anal sex and butthole as a sexual organ. It's the same fingers for a lesbian, which I know my friend did a piece of art about it. So they're a sexual object, and they can achieve and do orgasm. I'm kind of more interested in how you achieve sublime in your work, let's say, in your artwork, and how you recognize that it is that. And that's why I'm kind of thinking now very much about the kind of physical and the kind of sensual in a sexual way, maybe, because I don't know, it relates to my work, but so I'm kind of wondering how if we
So it's fundamental what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because Sublime is not the tool.
It's not that we have Sublime and we need to project it. It's like we do something and we achieve Sublime, isn't it?
Sublime.
Yeah.
I was going to say you can't try to make it.
No, it's not.
Like
It's
it
out of
might
control.
happen,
Yeah,
and then you're like,
you
Yeah,
approach
yeah.
it, yeah.
brilliant.
It might happen, yeah.
Yeah, if it happens, that's a bonus, but you can't
Doesn't
have the
happen,
intention of.
You won't
making
sit
it.
for 2 days, right?
But because of the play of ideas, if you does say you need culture to understand culture. I mean, the play of ideas to experience the sublime. So the more culture, the more you can play with ideas, then the more chance you have of experience the sublime. So that's slightly different from what you're saying. You know, it's not just something that you come across, you can lead up to it, I think.
But it is something that can be changed if one wants it. Precisely because it is a state of non-control, it cannot be controlled itself. One is always passive in the sublime experience.
What I was thinking, I mean, you think of the Baroque, think of surrealism, you know, with these ideas under your belt, then you have more chance of the sublime. But these are historical, they've come along, haven't they? So, you know, that's a different understanding of sublime than kind of a sublime of nature. You know, an older understanding of sublime.
The technological sublime,
Yeah.
Because this is completely different. The one that Mario Costa, it was Mario Costa, the philosopher, I think he's Italian, talk about that it doesn't make sense to talk about sublime now, like in the 19th century, and now all the rules are different. But I couldn't go further, so I just...
I've got something on that, actually.
That's a fantastic...
Here. I'll just read a little bit of this to relate to what I was going to say. Now, traditionally, it's just called Michael Crowder. It's like the French, the immaterial and the postmodern sublime. Now, traditionally, an aesthetic sensibility to infinity, or suggested of it, has been understood in terms of sublime.
Slower, Mark.
This notion can indeed be applied.
I didn't get any of that.
All right, I'll start again. Sublime, in other words, arises from a deconstruction of the familiar into that which normally functions subliminally. Postmodern sensibility can therefore be aptly described as sublimist. It is interesting, however, that why the immaterial was an exhibition that Lyotard put on of artworks, and the immaterial was just an exhibition. So why this exhibition, in itself, unmistakably points in this sublimistic direction? Why the sublifying figures crucially in Lyotard's philosophy writings on postmodernism? Why figures in his writing on postmodernism? He does nevertheless, he doesn't discuss sublimity. But this traditionally, the aesthetic sensitivity to the infinite has been understood as sublime. But this was arise from an encounter with objects which are physically overwhelming in terms of size or power. So the traditional
the mundane
was the monstrous in nature, but this modern sublime then is through art and through the cultural sublimist understanding. So your cliff becomes a Baroque cathedral or something like that. So there is a historical aspect to it, and coming from this, he says, a hypothesis, in the excess of his productive play with forms or aesthetic ideas being ideas that confound the concept, in the aesthetic ideas, what you were saying is a play of signifiers or something like that. So it goes, as it says on page 74 again, the hypothesis, in the excessive of its productive play with forms or aesthetic ideas, the imagination can go so far as to prevent the recognition by concept, to disconcert the consciousness that is dependent upon understanding the faculty of concept. Just think what you were saying, Kay. The fury evokes the excesses of the Baroque, of mannerism or surrealism, but it's also potential disturbance in the calm contemplation of the beautiful. The spirit, the Geist, the life vein of animation can always exceed the lesser, force it to give in, to resign, and the happiness of writing can thus turn into a delirium through an overabundance of images. We must remember that this kind of disturbance, which Kant would certainly not see as providing the pleasure of the beautiful, like him as it does a balance, a ratio suited to both powers, leads to the antipodes of sublime disturbance. I'm not sure what antipodes means. Is that like a...
The opposite is the anti.
We give it the name of Jesus. How Jesus is not the least sublime for critical analysis. It is crazy with forms and crazy about forms, where sublimity originates in their absence.
Yeah.
And then he says a little bit further, one can imagine in effect that by dint of the opposing of forms with concepts that are more and more extreme, in order to put this power, the imagination into difficulty, one more play of animation in the Baroque or Surrealism against the concept. The power of concepts determined by intuition, the imagination and difficulty, the power of concepts determined by the intuition. Understanding passes its hand to play to the power of concepts of reason, unrepresentable objects, so ideas. So in terms of your subject, but as being post-structural, in the post-structural subject, that's where I think the post-subject of your subject becomes becomes something that you can't meet within experience in that sense. So that's not post-structural.
Yeah, I don't want to label it, but not.
Yeah, yeah. So
it's not structuralist.
It's not a structuralist.
Not.
It's a post-structuralist. It's called both. I don't think people.
Can I bring a mutual example to this?
yeah.
Do you know at all the photograph of Sugimoto?
Yeah.
Sugimoto, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a Japanese-American photographer who made in the 90s.
Seascapes.
Huh?
The seascapes.
The seascapes and the cinemas. The seascapes are big black and white prints taken with a land camera of seas that are apparently the opposite of the Sublime. They're flat, it's calm, no wind, no special light, and there's a bit of mist or haze. So there is almost no detail in the wood because wood doesn't move, and the horizon fades. So the lack of information is such that you are looking at an image that is barely an image.
Yeah, yes, an horizon.
It's
sometimes
similar
it's
to like Rothko's paintings where they show.
Yeah.
There is something like that.
They
And
do
then
show
it
it
plays
too.
a similar, it tackles the same problem from a different object. He goes into all the Art Deco 1930 cinemas of around Los Angeles and sets the camera aperture for the whole length of the movie. The movie is projected, and because the aperture is so long, the screen is entirely white. So you see the old cinema, but you don't see the show. So in both cases, there is an element of, since you brought it up, a Sublime with contemporary technology, although I can say that photography is not contemporary anymore, but anyway, readdressed to a medium that is far more up to date than Kant, I think, at the end of the 18th century. Because all the information goes, you have all the expectation of that information, which is not far from your puppet and ventriloquist. The lack of sync returns. The lack of organization.
The anxiety as well.
Yeah,
The anxiety grace because you know that something was going on, but you cannot see it.
Yeah.
I think anxiety is.
Kant does talk about looking at the sea and then experiencing the sublime, and what you just the boundless ocean.
Yeah, but he
the
also
oceanic
says,
feeling.
he also says
Actually, it's like two.
that is not what
The
he's
same
after.
idea more about like the seas is like the 19th century idea of sublime, and the cinema is more like now kind of technological.
I think the sea becomes really important in Lyotard as well. But
Yeah, but we can't.
somebody who knows what Lyotard is.
You know, because I mean, Lyotard's fascinated with the sort of the divide between America and Europe, and the Atlantic Ocean operates as a sort of divide, and how they still influence each other's interest in painting.
And I think you should just jump again. Zizek looks at your technological screen as also that no one sees beyond the screen to behind the screen, that everything takes place in the sea, as it were, on the sea, which is just this flat surface, this appearance, and everything just comes and comes and comes and comes, and never goes that side of it. The technology, you know, how it works, that side of it, but will break the sea, the sea, the sea, the sea, the sea, the sea, the sea. So So maybe that's what you're thinking, you know, some thoughts that can go off in that direction, into notions of this screen of technology being this flat surface, boundless surface, infinite surface, that people never go through and touch the real of, you know, the nuts and bolts, as it were. It just becomes, everyone lives on the sea in the sublime.
The map, Baudrillard's map, the hyperreal map that's sort of laid over the real, nobody.
Baudrillard.
Yeah.
Actually, Sugimoto, the thing he wanted with this series of the seascapes, he was researching for something that was immutate, no change.
Yeah,
for
because
ages.
actually you can take it from a Zen angle. I mean, obviously there is an element of Far East culture. The description I was giving was a very Western one, because that work also goes with the Buddhas, the photographs that are all similar copies of the same thousand or something. So yeah, it's
but here the thing was something that never changed, or the thing closest to never change, and he found the seas. So it's like something that is, the time doesn't affect it, you know, like something like that.
But that's precisely, like, similarly when you go to the cinema pictures,
Time, the
time
time is important.
if you project time to infinity, between quotation here, the whole film, then you've got no details, nothing seems to change. So there is an element, there is a detachment between the chronology and the object. And that's a form of
I think
Sublime
this is the
that
point of this piece of art, or these works.
Sometimes we're confusing the trompe l'oeil with the Sublime, or is there are we confusing the trompe l'oeil with the Sublime?
I don't know what is the first one.
So it's like, is that exact, almost photographic realism within art?
It tricks you into thinking.
Yeah, it tricks you into
Yeah, it literally means something that
Something
tricks the eye
yeah.
to
Ah, okay.
And it was, came up in the 18th century as, instead of having a wall here, you would paint a corridor with 30 doors and a garden at the end, and all in perspective, and then it becomes
I
something.
think it's completely different, because here you are not,
It's the opposite, isn't it?
he's not lying you, actually he's telling you the truth.
Yeah.
He's not trying to confuse you. It's just too many times to show nothing, or too many times to be the same. You know, like,
It's got to have this notion of the infinite, you know, in the Sublime. This is also where we came in, isn't it? Because with Mathias, the three dimensions, we came out of Braver, didn't we? We came out of Braver with that sense of, you know, we had the theoretical on one side, the practical, the theoretical and the leap out of the theoretical in Wittgenstein and Braver, and then suddenly went into this open dimension, groundless ground. It's infinite space. But then why we get into the Sublime? Because it has to have this kind of infinite infinity within it. Surely that's how it links up. So I couldn't see how we got from Braver to suddenly went 3 dimensions, you know. So we got to the end of Braver, kind of thing, of Wittgenstein and Heidegger with, you know, the leap out of the theoretical, the out of belonging together in a density of difference, and the leap out of the together being the ologies, the logic, subject, predicate logic, into the event of appropriation, which is an engagement with linguistics, so and an open understanding and a more authentic understanding that takes you away from the fullness into the average everyday idle chatter of world, facticity and existence and fullness. Then from that openness into the dimensions itself being a groundless ground, but being very now, I think, and also very the infinite in the thing. Because the question was, how do we relate to the thing? And then Heidegger goes through the gods and the sky, and which is a different way of looking at things. Kant very much in terms of subject thing. So I think the infinite is what joins these things up. This idea of the infinite.
The infinite of the thing.
Yeah.
The infinity, for me, is easy to imagine, but the thing is more difficult. It's kind of, is thin.
It's thin. It's the thing things. The thing things is what Heidegger says. But his understanding of the thing, what is a thing, brings in this thought of the sky and the whispering of the gods and the mortal and hidden and unhidden. Whereas normal philosophy will understand the thing is the subject, predicate, this is something, that is a judgment. His understanding is different. But I still think, I'm just saying, it's infinite, but it's the one that connects up the dots here. I was wondering how we got out of bravery into the dimension of talk that we had the other day, which seems very contemporary. Well, your talk, because you're a man who likes to deal with the contemporary structures and sciences, but that kind of thing, and then as well. I'm not trying to pick on people here, but and Johnny, very much looks at these things in terms of an infinite understanding, an infinitude. This goes back. I don't know how we understand that, but this seems to be.
But yeah, that was the passage that we made.
Can I do I think it's quite stupid, similar, but it's like when you, if you were a computer, you are in an infinite loop. You are trying to find something that you are there in the edge, but you cannot. For me, this is the sublime. It's kind of impossibility that you are almost there, and you believe that you understand it, but you are not there yet.
Yeah, it goes on.
So you have to stop in some point. Okay, is that?
Well, I mean, since the collapse of the classical canon, since science, sinceology, I live in a kind of existential void, a kind of meaningless existence. The guarantees of old, everyone lives there, I guess you all live there. When you say, what's the purpose of this, that, and the other, there's no chance, science says, a big comet knocks stick to the next. But I don't know, but that's the infinity, that's how it affects me in the sublime, this kind of formlessness of existence when, you have an infinite understanding which kind of plonks us in the here and now with a groundless ground. There's no rhyme or reason, or there's no telos or goal, teleology that we understood before. I'm teaching people to suck eggs, aren't I? I'm teaching grandmother to suck eggs here. This is just what everyone surely experiences in this kind of the existential void of the here and this place that we live. That somehow, I understand. I'm not a religious person, so I have nothing really to hang on to anymore in that sense, that you live in this kind of space and nothing other than what I call wanting to see the other flourish or something. That's the only thing I've got left. It's nothing, because it's not down to me. It's not about me. It's about you kind of thing. Because there's nothing else to really to go for. There's no other life. There's no continuation. There's no time. The nature of time. The fact that it's this huge infinity. The nature of space is this huge infinity. The nature of understanding is this huge infinity.
What about death?
Yeah, what about death?
Death is infinite.
That interrupts the infinity, doesn't it? Somewhat.
It's the only thing for sure.
That's the thing that makes it for sure, yeah. Because
the only certainty.
Yeah, it's the only certainty. Well, there we go. Oh my God. Sounds like I went to agree with Heidegger. Metaphysics of death. Metaphysics. No, I didn't want to go there. Quick life.
We're going to go to eat a little bit of tortilla and forget it.
But hence the infinite, the arrival of the infinite in the now, perhaps more than ever before. Infinite ideas, infinite.
I think because everything's mediated. I mean, mass literacy's only been sort of with us for the last 100 years. So people lived much more in the real. They weren't dependent on icons and symbols. And
Yeah.
now everything is mediated, and so we're
I
in
call
this
that-
hyperreal state and we can't tell.
I call that mimesis of the inorganic, rather than following our own nature, as it were, which is always deferred, isn't it? We always have to defer. Otherwise, I would have bet that whole thing when it got past. I could have passed that on.
Yeah, it's interesting that we always leave that one or two pieces after
Everything is mediated.
And that's what I
It's
thought.
embarrassing.
That's what I thought.
The last piece
Yeah.
is the embarrassing one.
Yeah, you can't take it.
In Spain you say,
The
let's take the embarrassing one.
No!
Ah, you
was
didn't do
the
it.
leftover from
Crime.
that original spasm, you know? That's what I thought.
You
That's
want
like
It
covering
can't
and
be
recovering.
mediated.
But the fact that if you take all mediations away, you precipitate into infinity. There is no, you cannot, there is no unmediated, or if we want to use a word that often returns in several, singularity that you can use. Raw material, you can touch with your hands and adopt it. It's going to kill you, literally and culturally. We can see different forms of mediation, but the outside mediation is infinity, or total difference, or depth. There is no longer.
Or the pre-linguistic.
Yeah, but how long do you take
That's how you put it.
There are a couple of precisely on the pre-linguistic. There is a film that was taken, a French film that was taken from a novel of a boy found in the woods. It was made in the 50s.
Caspar Hauser.
No, Caspar Hauser comes later. It's a story of a boy from a teenager found in the woods and doesn't speak and doesn't. Caspar Hauser is an adult that can interact, but that doesn't speak and doesn't say where it comes from. This one is a boy like Tarzan who grows up in the wilderness, therefore does not know how to speak.
One of those wolf children.
Yes,
Yeah.
and doesn't, coping is not, it proves almost impossible because he is completely outside mediation. I would argue that he would have his own forms of mediation because as soon as you have a malleable brain that can react to things, you create forms of mediation. There is no mediation, even a plant mediates. There are different images projected onto the wall, which are the mediation one adopts. What I find interesting is that with the Sublime, you notice that those mediations are local. So there is precipice beyond those. That's ultimately to bring together Kant and Heidegger via Lyotard. This is my understanding of it. It just seemed past the frame for me. If you think of Paul Bain Ambassadors, the big painting with painting the all fantastic musical and object, astronomical tools for measuring, the amazing luxurious codes, the incredible curtain of the background in color, super luscious, and then in the upper left corner, the curtain is just a bit, and you see a corner of a crucifix, but it's painted in black and white, which is amazing in itself, because obviously the painting is not 16th century, but it really looks black and white, and there's incredible luscious color of the front. And you barely see it, but that's behind it is a flat board, something entirely different. And obviously that's still a mediation for us now, but at the time that was seen as the absolute. It was very.
But the anamorphic skull.
In front is the thing that you cannot see if you could build all this projection of mediation.
What I think is happening is he's got iconic images and he's got an index.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to yourself walk to the door to see that skull. And it's only as you're leaving the room, this is what Kant says, that you see the skull. And the weird thing is that one image disappears just as the other comes into view, so you can't see both.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the antidote to the trompe l'oeil. It's like you can't confuse an icon with an index because you can only have one at a time.
What's icon index bit more?
The icon is the mimetic thing. The signifiers resemble their objects, so they're terribly realistic looking, these ambassadors. And they're life-size, aren't they? They're huge. And if you look on the internet, you can see every detail of the floor tiles and their shoes, and it's been lovingly restored, and the colours are amazing. But that, in order to see the skull, that has to vanish, but you have to bodily move. And I've written a paper where I say it's like you've got the dummy and the dummy actor, and you're, you know, doing this in your own physicality, kind of. But with that painting, you have to get up and walk. So you're not being conned. You're, oh, this is physicality, and this is an image, and this is my body, and this is what's going to happen to it. So you're, like Kant talks about standing on the cusp of a trompe l'oeil. And he says that's when you get the pleasure and the delight, is when you can see it's just a trompe l'oeil, and you go, now you see it, now you don't, now you see it, now you don't.
Then it makes sense. Now part of this makes more sense.
Okay.
It's staying on the cusp of a trompe l'oeil makes more sense.
Yeah.
That's the signifier as being the painting. But can the signifier be, you know, it resemble the thing, yeah? That's what it says. In the painting, in this example, the signifier in the icon, say, it resembles the thing. Yes?
Yeah.
So can that be language? Can it be language that is the signifier when it explains the thing? Or says
Language
what the
is
thing
symbolic.
So
It's
it's
like
not-
Pavlov's dog.
So it's not iconic, that's the difference.
No.
It's symbolic.
Yeah.
But that can still be a signifier.
Yeah, the symbolic signifier stands in for its object. The iconic signifier resembles its object. But
So
the
language.
lexical signifier is contiguous with it. So instead of an equal sign, you have a plus sign. And that
Contiguous.
makes all the difference.
It's like an allegory, which doesn't resemble its object quite often. The allegorical paintings don't usually show what they're. It's like a little line on your shirt, you know. It's not a very good representation. It's I suppose I'm saying it's symbolic. It's an allegorical representation, which means it's not like what it is. It doesn't exude, say, pride or strength or whatever it is that a lion's meant to, you know, stand for. So that's not an accurate. Is that your contiguous?
No, it's the contiguity is the mother and the baby. The baby needs the mother to be there to see, smell, touch, taste, or, you know, the sensory. And the mother goes out of the room. The baby's anxious. The mother comes back in, and then the baby learns, as it learns language, that something can represent the mother, and it can have a teddy instead, and that'll do till the mother comes back. And these are the kind of steps of learning language. And a rattle as well. A rattle teaches the baby lip sync. The baby has to look with its ear when it hears a rattle. And the idea is that its eye and ear knits up. And that's what you need to learn language. That's one of the very early steps of learning language. And what Bond does with the dummy and dummy actor is he reverses that process. So you can't knit it up. So you can't have lip sync. And and that puts you, I think, in the situation of the baby, which is this very unstructured, sublime place where, yes, you've got fear, but you've also got
But isn't it part of kind of externalisation? Doesn't the baby also learn that the mother will return? Is not just because lots of children reject dummies and teddies and everything. They just don't want anything at all apart from the mother. But the baby starts to learn that the mother's in another room, but she exists separate from her or him.
But not until you've got language can you sort of have a concept.
Well, they can. I mean, they do quite young, I think.
Yeah.
Children do. They have to have that concept. Otherwise, they can't.
They can't be separate.
They can't be separate from the mother. They can't separate themselves. They can never be weaned. Then. Yeah.
It is that thing.
It is that thing. Yeah. They have to learn that if you're out of the room, you do still exist.
Yeah.
And often parents will call through. It's okay. I'm here. I'm
So-
here. It's that kind of thing.
Should we say, since you keep pointing at the line of this example,
Don't come back to
that, that the introduction of finite sizes, the introduction of an organization of time and space is what makes the present distribution, or the adult distribution,
Yeah.
Because it's infinite as long as you only see a detail of the mother, and you cannot understand where it ends, or she ends, and when she is in the other room. And then at a certain point you can make that finite. You see the contour of the person.
Yeah.
You see
figure.
the distribution of space, and you can figure out that she's behind a wall or something.
And the baby lives on both sides of its skin.
So
It is
that
it's
brings us
monad.
back to the problem that Heidegger brings up. That if we realize that finitude, it's built, is not absolute, then that anguish or anxiety that the baby might experience comes back when you're 45.
So we're super sensible then. Is it no, I don't think everybody's mentioned super sensible unless that was when I was at the room.
Yeah, we discussed the whole of super sensible. That's
the bit I was quite interested to hear what people would say about the super sensible.
Well, looking at when you're going to track things back in Kant, and there's the groundless ground in Kant. There's nothing below the noumenal or the thing in itself. That's the limit. That's the limit that you get to. And beyond that, it's super sensible. Like moral feelings, moral thoughts. You trace them back, but they're not mediated. They're mediated in their form, but they arise from the super sensible or the noumenal realm or the thing in itself, which is the ground. I understand would be a groundless ground, but it's a different kind of ground. So there's a number of groundless grounds.
Because for Kant, it's not that that ground doesn't exist. It exists. The subject exists, but you can hang on to it as clearly as was done before. It's a nominal. The reality exists, but the only thing we know of reality is the data already recognized by our faculties and by our intuition forms. So, for Heidegger, that three items support everything is simply no longer there. It vanishes constantly.
He takes, it hasn't got that kind of super set. It hasn't got that groundless ground. One of the groundless grounds of Heidegger is the fact that there's an abyss or a nothing. Is we talked about this the other day, that because society has forgotten being, big B being, or big B being, then that is the nothing. So that is the nothing, the abyss that lies underneath, and it's the social world. It's actually the world of advertising, his idle chatter, that the world of the world of the fallen, that you fall into, the world of the average everydayness, the everyday world, which is the groundless ground and is nothing because it's forgotten big being. So this groundless ground, this abyss, is actually the world that you already are already involved in as existence, or desire being there, being here, which is the da meaning place, and design being I am. So I'm not talking about objects. I am. So the desire being there, being here, and then forgetting of big being in the society, in that world, in this world, is what creates the groundless ground, or is partly understood as the groundless ground. That is the abyss underneath, I think.
We think this is grounded, but it isn't. And we think this isn't grounded, but it is.
The beings. First, the two eggs. I mean, the two circles.
Or a peach.
Have you been a peach? You've been an orange. Have you been a peach? In your act?
Yes. It also reminds me of the blue air. Like when you mentioned the blue color, it was the breathing of the blue air. So you lie on the stage and you need to breathe the blue air to fill yourself up with the blue air. And you need to imagine the blue air.
Where did you train?
Just theatrical.
Well, when I worked in women's theatre, that was the sign for women. Anyway,
Sign for?
the women's,
Like a heart?
yeah,
A heart.
like beam, yeah. That was in the 80s, it was
so
used all the
imagine
time.
training
It's like
at the age of
this,
14 with blue air and understanding concept of pure form.
Primitively, it was a circle. The symbol of the wall.
Yeah.
Open.
Say what?
Johnny will ask me what how it went today and what we want to do next week. Johnny will ask what we want to do next week.
Carry on?
You carry on with this?
Yeah, I find it very interesting.
Is it
Yeah.
everybody's wish to do one more round at
She said that we'd do something next week. Should we say we do this week?
she likes to start on another
She talked about
speculative theories, but that's a big subject. You can just touch it next week.
Forget about it.
Should we have another go at this one?
Yeah.
I suggest that to feel more comfortable, you look at Kant directly, which is far easier to read than
Really?
Yeah.
Can I have like 5 minutes?
Can I make a reading suggestion as well?
Yeah.
In Lyotard's The Inhuman Reflections on Time, chapter 7 is The Sublime, the Avant-Garde, which is a good. Yeah,
Have we
chapter
got it
7.
in the Dropbox?
It's in the Dropbox, yeah. It's about 20 pages. So it's not much.
Lyotard what, sorry?
Lyotard is called The Inhuman Reflections on Time,
Sorry?
and it's chapter 7, The Sublime and the Avant-Garde.
Chapter 7.
In that he talks about how painting as an art form is not getting, in fact, painting is the way, opens up into an influence in how it
Can you
is
say
the
it
way
one
to
more
reveal
time?
the sublime.
Sublime and the avant-garde.
Chapter 7,
In what's
Being
the book?
human.
The Inhuman
It's
Reflections
in the
on Time.
Dropbox.
Yeah.
Being human.
Yeah. It's a series of small Lyotard.
What can
Should we, if someone follow Oscar's very good point and try to find an example, sounds a bit silly, but starting points for contemporary technology supply?
Yeah.
If anybody pulls upon something.
I think we don't have any book in the of this guy, the Mario Costa.
Well, I think she checks. Is there in
The sublime object of desire. Yeah, what is it?
Flaving Fantasy?
I don't know. I read one.
Well,
of
I'll
these
get that.
Okay, you will be. You expose yourself to Johnny's.
Yeah, she doesn't like it.
Flaving fantasies.
Brilliant. Who is having the last?
you?
Wasn't a tough question. Was it?